They call me Papa. 6 grandkids do it, but it was Rachel who started it, and I never got tired of hearing it, not once in 20-some years. So when my own daughter looked at me across her kitchen table and said, "Dad, maybe you should call Marcus," I remember thinking that was the first time in a long while somebody in my family had said my son's name to me like it was supposed to fix something. I didn't call Marcus that night. I want to get that out of the way early, because I know how these stories usually go, and I don't want you thinking I ran to the phone the second I heard a number I couldn't afford. I sat there instead, in my daughter Denise's kitchen, with a glass of sweet tea going warm in my hand, and I thought about how strange it is that a man can raise 2 children in the same house, feed them the same supper every night, and still end up with 2 completely different people walking around wearing his last name. I'm 63 years old. I live outside of Council Bluffs, Iowa, in a house I built with my own 2 hands back when my knees still let me climb a ladder without complaining about it. Name's Walter Higbee. Folks around here just call me Walt. I spent 31 years running the parts counter and then the whole service department at a John Deere dealership off Highway 92, and I raised 2 kids in that house with my wife Judith before the cancer took her 9 years ago. That's a different story. Maybe I'll tell it sometime. Not tonight. Tonight's story starts on a Thursday in early spring, when I found out I had a mass in my colon the size of a golf ball, and a surgeon in Omaha told me if we didn't get it out inside of 3 weeks, we wouldn't be having this conversation much longer. Welcome in, if you're new here. Grab something to drink, get comfortable, because this one's going to take a minute, and I think it's going to matter to some of you the way it mattered to me. If you've got people in your life who showed up when it counted, or people who didn't, go ahead and drop where you're watching from down in the comments. I'd like to know who's sitting with me tonight. Now, let me back up, because you need to understand my family before I tell you what my family did. Marcus is 33. He's my oldest, and God help me, I was proud of that boy for a long time. He went to Iowa State on a partial scholarship, got himself an engineering degree, and then did something none of us saw coming. He started buying up old grain elevators and turning them into what he calls boutique storage facilities for city folks who need somewhere to keep their boats and their extra furniture. Turned out there was real money in that. Real money. 4 years ago, he sold his whole operation to a bigger outfit out of Minneapolis for what he told his mother before she passed. She got to hear this part at least was 11 million after taxes. He said it the way another man might say he'd caught a nice fish. Just matter of fact. Like it wasn't the kind of number that changes what a family owes each other. Denise is 28. She teaches special education at a middle school in Council Bluffs. The kind of job where you come home some nights and you don't have the energy to talk because you spent the whole day getting spit at and cussed out by children who can't help what they do, and you still go back the next morning and hug every one of them at the door. She married a decent man named Kyle who works construction, and between the 2 of them they've got a mortgage, 2 car payments, and a boy of their own, my grandson Tucker, who just turned 4. I want to tell you something about the difference between my 2 kids before I go any further, because it matters for everything that comes after. When the grain elevator money came in, Marcus bought himself a lake house down in the Ozarks that he visits maybe 6 weekends a year. When Denise got her first real teaching paycheck, she used part of it to buy winter coats for 4 kids in her classroom whose families couldn't afford them. Nobody told her to do that. Nobody even found out about it, until one of the other teachers mentioned it to me at a Christmas program. That's just who she's always been. And Marcus isn't a bad man, not the way you'd read about in a newspaper. He's just gotten real good at forgetting what it felt like before the elevator money, and real comfortable believing he built every bit of it without a single soul helping him along the way. Never mind that I co-signed his first business loan. Never mind that his mother and I let him live in our basement rent-free for 2 years while he got that first building off the ground. He remembers the empire. He doesn't much remember the scaffolding. The Thursday I found out about the mass, I'd gone into the VA clinic in Omaha because I'd had blood in places blood's got no business being for about 6 weeks, and I kept telling myself it was hemorrhoids because that's easier to say out loud than the alternative. Dr. Okafor didn't dance around it. She's not built that way, and I respect her for it. She said, "Mr. Higbee, this needs to come out, and it needs to come out soon. I'm not going to sugarcoat the timeline for you." "Fine," I said, Because what else do you say to a woman holding a scan of your own insides? Here's where it got complicated. My VA coverage handles a lot, but the specific surgical approach, Dr. Okafor wanted a robotic-assisted procedure done by the one surgeon in the region with the numbers she trusted fell into a gap. Prior authorization pending, they told me, which is government speak for maybe, eventually, possibly, if you're patient and healthy enough to still need it by the time we get around to saying yes. The clinic's financial counselor, a tired-looking young man named Perez, told me if I wanted to skip the wait and go private pay to guarantee the date. I was looking at $4,100 up front, non-refundable, due before they'd put me on the schedule. $4,100. I sat in my truck in that parking lot and did the math the same way. I imagine a lot of men my age have done it, turning over every account I had, every possibility, coming up short every single time. My pension from Deere covers my house and my truck, and not much more than that. I don't have $4,000 sitting around. I never have. I built a house instead of building a savings account, and most days I don't regret that trade, but that Thursday, sitting in that parking lot, I regretted it plenty. And I thought about my son, $11 million, after taxes, sitting somewhere in an account with his name on it. 4,000 and change wouldn't even show up as a rounding error to a man like that. I told myself I wasn't going to call him. I told myself that clear through the weekend. Then Monday morning I called him anyway, because that's what a father does when his pride runs out of road. He swallows what's left of it and dials the number anyway, hoping the boy who used to fall asleep on his chest in front of the television is still in there, somewhere underneath the man who talks about elevators like they're diamonds. He picked up on the fifth ring. I could hear a golf cart engine in the background, and somebody laughing, and ice clinking in a glass. Dad, hey, can I call you back? We're on the back nine at Eagle Ridge. Marcus, I need a few minutes. It's serious. There was a pause. Then that muffled sound like he'd put his hand over the phone. Then, yeah, all right. Go ahead. But make it quick. I'm about to tee off. I told him everything. The mass, the timeline, the gap in coverage, the $4,100 I needed by Friday, or I'd lose my spot on the schedule and have to start the authorization process over from scratch, which could mean months I apparently didn't have. Silence on the line. Long enough that for one foolish second I let myself believe he was doing the math in his head the way a son does when he's about to say yes. Then his voice came back flat. Dad, I can't just start writing checks every time something goes wrong in that house. You know I just closed on the Cedar Rapids property. I've got cash tied up everywhere right now. Have you tried asking the VA for a payment plan? Marcus, this isn't a payment plan situation. This is surgery. Everything's always an emergency with you. His voice dropped, got that clipped, executive tone he uses now, the one he probably uses on contractors who show up late. I built what I have by not throwing money at every fire that pops up. You didn't save for stuff like this, and now you want me to bail out a problem that isn't mine. The line went quiet except for somebody yelling "for" way off in the background, and I understood I'd already lost him before I even finished the sentence. Ask Denise, he said, right before he hung up. She's got a teacher's salary. She'll figure something out for you. That's what family's for, right? He said it like a joke. Maybe to him it was one. I sat in that parking lot outside the VA clinic for a long time after that call ended. Didn't cry. I'd done enough of that 9 years ago, at the end, sitting in a different chair in a different hospital, and I guess I used up whatever I had left for chairs like that. I drove to Denise's house that evening because I couldn't stand the idea of sitting alone in mine with that number in my head. She knew something was wrong the second I walked in. She always knows. Some kids inherit their daddy's height or his stubbornness. Denise inherited whatever it is that lets you read a room before anybody in it says a word. Dad, she said, setting down the dish towel. What happened? So I told her. And I want you to understand. I was ashamed sitting there telling my 28-year-old daughter, a woman with a car payment and a 4-year-old and a mortgage, that I needed money her own brother had turned down without so much as a second breath. I didn't even get all the way through it. Denise walked into her bedroom, came back out with an envelope, and set it on the table in front of me without a word. Then she turned her phone around so I could see the screen, a notification, Approved. A $2,000 loan from one of those payday places that charges you like it's a crime to be short on cash. Dad, stop. Her voice wasn't shaking, even though her eyes were wet. There's $2,200 in that envelope. I sold my wedding ring, Denise. My throat closed right up on me. Kyle already knows, she said. Before you go, feeling worse about it than you need to. We agreed. Rings can be replaced. You can't. I'll get another ring someday when things are easier. I'm not getting another dad. I sat in her kitchen, and I wept like a man half my age, right there in front of my grandson's booster seat and a crock-pot still simmering on the counter. My daughter, the one who never once got bragged about on a phone call, the one with $2,000 less in her life because of me, reached across that table and held onto my hand, like she meant to keep holding it whether I let her or not. She's the only one who ever really saw me, I thought, the only one left. I had no idea, sitting in that kitchen, just how much that moment was about to matter, or what was still waiting for me 200 miles east, on a piece of land I hadn't thought about in almost 11 years. But we'll get there. Let me take you through the surgery first, because you need to understand what it cost to get to the letter that changed everything. They wheeled me back at 6 in the morning on a Tuesday in April. Last thing I remember before the anesthesia took me under was Denise's face close to mine, her hand squeezing my fingers so tight it nearly hurt. You're going to be just fine, old man, she said. I already told the nurses you're too stubborn to die on a Tuesday. Bad luck day. They laughed, but I think they believed her. I woke up almost 9 hours later with a tube down my throat and pain sitting in my belly like a truck had parked there. Doctor Okafor came by that evening, still in her scrubs, leaned down so I could hear her over the monitors. We got clean margins, Mr. Higby. You did good. I didn't cry that time either. I just laid there, thinking about a wedding ring sitting in some pawnshop case with somebody else's fingerprints on it now, bought for $2,200 so her old man could keep breathing. I'm going to make this right, I told myself, however long it takes. I spent the next 2.5 weeks recovering on Denise and Kyle's fold-out couch because my own house sat empty and quiet, and I wasn't ready for that kind of quiet yet. Their place is a modest 3-bedroom out past the Costco on the west side, the kind of house where you can hear Tucker's cartoons through 2 closed doors. Denise taped her grading schedule to the fridge with a magnet from Tucker's daycare, right next to a crayon drawing he'd made of our whole family, including a stick figure Marcus he'd drawn way off in the corner of the page. Small, like an afterthought. Kids notice more than we give them credit for. She'd come home every afternoon, still smelling like dry erase markers in school cafeteria, check my incision, heat up something simple, sit with me through whatever true crime show she liked that week. Not once did she bring up the ring. Not once did she ask when I'd be paying her back. Richard gives, because he wants credit, I remember thinking one night, watching her fall asleep, sitting up in a kitchen chair, still in her work clothes. Denise gives because she doesn't even think of it as giving. It's just what love looks like to her. It was a Wednesday, 19 days after the surgery, when the mail carrier knocked instead of just leaving things in the box. Denise was at school. I answered the door in my robe, moving slow, still tender across the belly. 2 certified letters, ma'am said, needing a signature. One from an outfit called Prairie Vista Land Partners. The other with a return address I recognized instantly, even 11 years later, the Army Corps of Engineers. I almost didn't open either one right there at the door. I almost set them on the counter and went back to the couch. But something made me sit down at Denise's little kitchen table and tear open the core letter first. I need to explain something here, because it matters. 11 years ago, back before Judith got sick, I bought 90 acres of farmland out past Missouri Valley, right along a stretch of the Missouri River bottom, betting that a proposed levee expansion would eventually put my acreage on the safe, dry side of a new flood control system, which would have made it some of the most valuable ground in 3 counties. Everybody at the co-op thought I'd lost my mind, spending nearly everything Judith and I had saved on ground nobody else wanted. Then the levee project stalled. Then a flood came through 2 years later, and put half that acreage underwater for a season, which triggered a federal floodplain restriction that locked the whole 90 acres under Corps oversight. Couldn't build, couldn't sell to any buyer who wanted financing. I couldn't do a single thing, except keep paying the property taxes, and watched my credit take a beating year after year, while the bank called in what credit lines I had left. That was the same stretch of years cancer took Judith. I buried my wife and watched my land turn into a debt I couldn't even give away, both in the same 18 months. Marcus was 22 then, just starting to make real money off his first grain elevator conversion. And I remember him telling me, at his own mother's funeral reception, that he hoped I'd learned something about taking big risks with family money. He's never once let me forget that land was a mistake. So when I open that core letter and read the words restoration compliance complete, property released from federal floodplain oversight, effective this date, I read it 3 times before I trusted my own eyes. 11 years. 11 years of taxes on land I couldn't touch. 11 years of my son treating me like a cautionary tale at his own mother's funeral. And there it was. Released, clean, done. I opened the second letter with hands that weren't quite steady anymore. Prairie Vista Land Partners. Turned out that stalled levee project hadn't stalled forever. It had finally broken ground 2 years back, and my 90 acres, the ground everybody laughed at, now sat directly behind the new flood wall, dry, protected, and zoned for exactly the kind of riverside development that had suddenly become the most sought-after real estate between Omaha and Sioux City. The letter was an offer. Not a feeler, a real one, with numbers behind it. $17 million, cash, 45-day close. I read that figure about 20 times. I didn't whoop, I didn't holler. I sat very still at my daughter's kitchen table with a stack of ungraded spelling tests, 6 inches from my elbow, and I thought, 3 weeks ago I couldn't find $4,000, and today I'm holding $17 million. My eyes went straight to that daycare magnet on the fridge, Denise's grading schedule underneath it, and I thought about her riding to school every morning in a car with 140,000 miles on it because she'd rather fix the transmission herself than ask anybody for a dime, and how she'd handed over her wedding ring without blinking so I could keep breathing. Something in me went quiet and cold and clear right then. I didn't call Marcus. I didn't call anybody in my family. I called Ellen Voss instead, the attorney who'd handled what little legal business I had left since Judith passed, mostly because she'd never once made me feel small for how little of it there was to handle. Ellen, it's Walt. I need you to pull some paperwork today, if you can spare the time. I told her everything: the core release, the Prairie Vista offer, the number. Long pause on her end. 17 million, she finally said. Walt, that changes everything. I know it does, I told her. That's exactly why I need you to pull something else first. You remember a document Judith and I signed about 6 years back, before she passed? Marcus set the meeting up, told his mother it'd protect her assets if the flood debt ever came looking for the house. Ellen went quiet on her end. I remember it. Walt. I told Judith at the time I didn't love the shape of it, but she was scared about losing the house, and it was her right to protect herself. Pull it. Read me exactly what it says, word for word. She called back 2 hours later, papers shuffling on her end of the line. Walt, I'm reading the operative clause. Judith Higbee hereby waives, releases, and forever discharges any and all present or future marital claim, interest or right, legal or equitable, in and to the real property described herein, including any proceeds, appreciation, or value realized therefrom, regardless of cause. Regardless of cause, I repeated. That's right, Ellen said. Judith took the house and her retirement account as sole separate property to protect them from the flood debt, and in exchange, you took 100% ownership and 100% liability on that river land as your sole separate property. It was notarized, binding the day she signed it, and since she passed, her estate has no claim on it either. That waiver survives her. Marcus set that meeting up, didn't he? I said. It wasn't a question. He told his mother it was smart, Ellen said. Protect what you can, in case the bank comes after the house for your father's mistakes. His words, apparently. I almost laughed. Nothing about it felt funny, but I almost laughed anyway. So whatever that land is worth now, I said slowly, good, bad, or $17 million, nobody in my family has a legal claim to a single dollar of it except me. Not $1, Ellen confirmed. Not your late wife's estate, not your son, not anyone. It's entirely yours to do with as you see fit. I sat there at Denise's kitchen table a long while after we hung up, afternoon light coming through those thin apartment-style blinds, feeling something in my chest that wasn't grief and wasn't shame for the first time in longer than I could remember. It was clarity. Ellen, I want to move forward on the Prairie Vista offer. I don't want a single soul knowing about this until it's finished. Not Marcus. Especially not Marcus. Understood, she said. What do you want done with it? Draw up whatever needs drawing up. I want the sale closed, and right alongside it, I want an irrevocable trust set up in Denise's name. Silence for a second. All of it, Walt? The whole 17 million? Every dollar left after my medical bills and the closing costs get handled, I said, and my voice didn't shake, which surprised me more than it should have. She sold her wedding ring for me, Ellen. Took out a payday loan at whatever ungodly interest rate those police charge, so I'd have $4,000 by a Friday deadline. My son had 11 million sitting in an account and told me to ask the school teacher. I stopped. Had to. My throat had gone tight again. So no, I said. I'm not splitting this down the middle for the sake of looking fair. Fair already happened 3 weeks ago at my daughter's kitchen table, and only one of my children showed up for it. I hear you, Walt, Ellen said quietly. I'll have paperwork ready inside a week. One more thing. Don't put my name on anything new. Not the deed to whatever house I buy her. Not the trust. None of it. I want this airtight. I don't want there to be one single piece of it anybody can argue about later. Airtight, Ellen said. I understand completely. I hung up and sat there a long while, listening to Denise's window unit hum, looking at that daycare magnet on the fridge. They're going to find out eventually, I thought. And when they do, they won't come asking how I'm healing. They'll come asking about the money. That's just who some people become, once enough years pass. I wasn't wrong, but not in the way I expected, and not for the reason I expected either. See, I figured Marcus would show up because word got around about the land. That's not what happened. He showed up 11 days later because his own life had come apart at the seams, and he needed money so badly he was willing to walk right back through a door he thought he'd left behind for good his broke, embarrassing father's temporary bedroom on his sister's fold-out couch. He had no idea what he was about to find waiting for him there. I did. I'd had 11 days to get ready for it. If you've made it this far, go ahead and hit that like button. And let me know down in the comments who do you think showed up worse in this story so far. Because trust me, it gets more complicated before we're through. 11 days. That's how long I had between hanging up with Ellen and hearing that first hard knock on Denise's door. I didn't spend those 11 days plotting some grand speech. Mostly I just healed. Walked a little farther every morning around the block. Sat on Denise's little back patio in the evenings, watching Tucker chase fireflies, thinking about 90 acres of river bottom that had finally, after 11 years, stopped punishing me. Then, that Thursday evening came, and somebody pounded on Denise's front door hard enough to rattle the storm window. Dad! Dad! I know you're in there. Open up. Marcus's voice, loud, frayed at the edges in a way I'd genuinely never heard from him before. Denise got to the door before I did, still in the cardigan she wears grading papers in, and pulled it open with a look I recognized, the one she must give a kid in her classroom right before he gets sent to the principal's office. You want to explain why you're pounding on my door like the sheriff, she said. Marcus pushed past her without answering. And there he was, 33 years old, tie already loosened, sweat on his collar even though it wasn't hot enough outside to explain it. Not one word about the surgery. Not one word about how I was healing. Straight to business, same as always. Dad. His voice cracked. Just barely. Right in the middle. We need to talk. Now. There it is, I thought. Not how are you feeling. Not I'm sorry I hung up on you on a golf course while you were sitting in a hospital parking lot. Straight to business. Sit down, Marcus, I said. You look like you're about to have your own health scare. He didn't sit. He paced Denise's little living room like a man circling a drain. I was going through the county property records today, he said, voice climbing. Prairie Vista Land Partners logged a closing memorandum. 90 acres out past Missouri Valley. That's your ground. Dad. $17 million. You sold it, didn't you? So that's how he found out, I thought. Not from me. From a courthouse filing. Almost funny, in a sick sort of way. It's true, I said, calm as I could manage. Closed 12 days ago. 12 days? His voice climbed another notch. You've had that money for 12 days, and you didn't call your own son? I looked at him a long moment before answering. Last time I called you, Marcus, you were on the back nine at Eagle Ridge, and you told me it wasn't your problem. So no, I didn't feel any particular urgency to call you the second something good happened to me either. That should have softened him. It didn't. You hid this from me, he said, finger coming up, jabbing toward me like it might make the words truer. You knew that levee project was finally moving. You knew that land was about to be worth something. You let me think you were broke this whole time while you were sitting on a fortune, just so you could hand it all to your favorite kid the second it paid off. He actually believes that, I thought. Rewriting the whole thing in real time, right in front of me, and believing every word coming out of his own mouth. Marcus, I said, and my voice came out quieter than his, which somehow made the whole room go quieter too. I didn't know that land was worth a dime until 19 days ago. I found out sitting at your sister's kitchen table, recovering from a surgery she paid for with her wedding ring. You want to talk about hiding things? I didn't hide a fortune from this family. I hid the fact that I was scared for 11 straight years, because every time I tried to talk about that land, your mother and I just quietly ate the cost. And you told everyone at her funeral it was a lesson I needed to learn. He flinched at that, just barely. But he recovered fast, the way he always does. Denise stepped in from the kitchen doorway then, arms crossed, quiet fury on her face I'd never seen aimed at her own brother before. Don't you dare, she said. Don't you dare come into my house and talk about hiding things, Marcus. Where were you the week Dad needed $4,000 for surgery? Golfing. And where was I? Selling my wedding ring at a pawn shop on Broadway. We're not asking anymore, Marcus said. And here's where his voice really changed, dropped low and mean, the voice of a man who thought he was about to win something. I'm filing a claim against that sale, Dad. My lawyer says a asset that's significant, acquired during a marriage, even if it closed after Mom passed, her estate meaning me, as executor has grounds to challenge the transfer. You hid marital property. That's not a gray area. I looked at him for a long moment. Then I stood up, slow, careful, still tender across the belly, and reached into my jacket pocket. You want to talk about lawyers, Marcus, I said. Let's talk about lawyers. I pulled out 2 folded documents and slid the first one across Denise's coffee table toward him. You remember this? I asked. Or maybe you don't, since you were the one who set the meeting up and never had to live with what it actually said. He looked down, and I watched his face change before he'd even finished the first paragraph. 6 years ago, I said, you sat your mother down at our own kitchen table, told her it was smart, told her it would protect the house and her retirement if my land debt ever came looking for it. She was scared, Marcus. Scared enough that she signed whatever you and Ellen's predecessor put in front of her. Regardless of cause, I said, tapping the page. Those are the words in that document. Your mother didn't just protect herself from my failure. She signed away every claim, present or future, on that land permanently. And since her estate can't claim rights she waived while she was alive, there's nothing for you to inherit a piece of, either. You made sure of that yourself, 6 years ago, thinking you were being clever. Marcus's face had gone the color of old paper. That doesn't matter, he said, but the fight had gone soft around the edges. I'll still take you to court. On what grounds, Marcus? I said, and slid the second document across. Take a look at this one before you finish that sentence. He looked down. A bank statement. Denise's account. $14, I said. That's what was sitting in your sister's checking account the week I needed surgery, because she'd just handed a wedding ring across a pawn shop counter and taken out a payday loan at 22% interest so I'd make my Friday deadline. While you were ordering top-shelf bourbon on the back nine at Eagle Ridge, your sister was riding to work in a car with 140,000 miles on it because she needed every spare dollar to go toward keeping her father alive. Nobody said a word for a long moment. Just Tucker's cartoon still playing faintly down the hall, and somewhere outside a neighbor's sprinkler ticking against a fence. I didn't hide this money to be cruel, I said, my voice finally coming down soft, tired, done. I kept it quiet because I needed time to make sure it went to the only person who actually earned it. But I want you to understand something, Marcus. Even if I'd known sooner, even if I'd had months of warning instead of days, it wouldn't change one thing about tonight. You divorced yourself from this family a long time ago. You just hadn't gotten around to the paperwork. The trust is already finalized, I told him. Irrevocable. The full 17 million, minus my medical costs, goes to your sister. Every dollar. First thing Ellen's office did was pay off that payday loan and buy back Denise's ring from the pawn shop. Exact same ring. I made sure of that. Paid off her and Kyle's mortgage outright. Set aside enough for Tucker's college so neither one of them has to think about it again. You're both officially free of my mistakes now, I said. Isn't that what you always wanted? Marcus just stood there, jaw working, staring down at that bank statement like it might rearrange itself into different numbers if he looked hard enough. Get out of my daughter's house, I said. Quiet. Final. He left without another word, which was somehow louder than anything he could have shouted. No slammed door. Just a man walking out of his sister's living room, realizing in real time that the very cleverness he'd always been so proud of, the legal maneuver he'd talked his own mother into 6 years back to protect her from his father's failures, was the exact thing that had locked him out of a fortune he'd never see a single dollar of. Denise stood in the kitchen doorway after he'd gone, arms wrapped around herself, watching me. Dad, she whispered, you didn't have to give me all of it. Yes, I said, I did. I walked over and put my arm around her, careful of my belly, and we stood there a minute in that little house that had held me together for 19 days when I had nowhere else quiet enough to go. Rings can be replaced, she'd told me once, sliding an envelope across a pawn shop counter of her own making. You can't. Turned out I couldn't be replaced either, not to her. And in the end, that was worth more than any number a land developer in a suit ever put on a piece of paper. We stood there in the quiet, my daughter and me, finally safe, finally free. And somewhere across town that same night, my son sat alone in an empty office trying to figure out how he was going to explain to his own lawyer that the 11 million he'd bragged about for years wasn't nearly enough to cover what he'd just lost, and that there wasn't a single soul left in his corner willing to help him carry it. Funny how that works out, if you give it enough time. If this one meant something to you, go on and hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already, and tell me down in the comments where you're watching from tonight. I'll see you on the next one. Real love doesn't keep score, and it never waits for proof that you're worth showing up for. A wedding ring can be bought back, a debt can be paid off, but the kind of person who sells what little they have without being asked, that's the fortune worth building your life around. Wealth comes and goes. The people who stay in the parking lot with you never do. A small note for you. This story was written and fictionalized by AI for entertainment purposes, while hoping to bring you a meaningful and positive life lesson.